If you know where this loading screen will take you, I believe it is finally time for you to look at some retirement plans, either at places like Robinhood or Fidelity. I do hear that they have some great plans for people your age. But in any case, let's see if you can picture this. School is out for the summer, money is hard to come by, but the City Hall has an offer for you to deal with some rogues for a nice hefty 3000 GP. Are you landless? Get to work fighting rogues. Are you maidenless? Well, get out there and make a name for yourself. Are you sure you want to fight us? Absolutely. And then welcome to the game of feudalism, where the battles are epic, the rogues are unlimited, and the world is yours for the taking. As always, time for some context. And so the game series, Feudalism, was actually made by a single developer, VitalyZ, which we'll be referring to him as VitalyZ, as was his gamer tag throughout this time. Now the first game, Feudalism 1, released in September of 2007 and was published by the gaming portal ArcadeTown, which you can see flash across the screen for each game. Now as this game increased in popularity, was that it got pushed to other Flash game websites like Conqueror, was where I personally played those games, as it was free to play and available quite easily on those sites. But because of the increased success of the first game, it led to VitalyZ releasing the second game, Feudalism 2, in the year after, in 2008. Now that game did add a lot more content to the first game, and the most interesting feature was that people can come in and customize their character with any of the things that the second game had to offer, giving it a whole new experience. Then, fast forwarding a few years later into the last installment in Feudalism 3, released in 2013, the first thing that players will notice is that the look completely changed in a different way, as you can see in the type of fights and battles that occurred, in that things like firearms and magic could be used, making this series turn into a more fantasy role instead of the more historical one in the past. But nonetheless though, is that VitalyZ did work on other Flash games all the way until 2015, and other similar series such as Endless War and Loot Heroes, which might be familiar to other players. And it turns out that even up till today, is that our friend VitalyZ is still active on places like Congregate, playing Flash games like the rest of us. But for the scope of this video, I'll be talking mainly about Feudalism 1 and 2, as those games held core memories of me trying to cosplay as a Northern Crusader, all the way in the Order of the Holy Cross, conquering my way all the way to the Far East, where the highly trained and deadly ninjas awaited. To begin, Feudalism 1 introduced the player to the 4 different realms and cultures that the world is built off of, and when you start the game, you can select 1 out of the 8 different characters, 2 of which are assigned to each of those cultures based on the different fighting styles and weapons that they will use. So to begin with, back down to the south, is that we have Edgar and Selena of the Great Trade Republic, in that, from what I can tell, they are modeled kind of after that Greek or Roman look, with the time period kind of switching around to match this type of time frame. Nonetheless though, the game specifically notes that the Republic produces the best swords and crossbows at the continent. They also make good armor and bows. They are the only nation who produces daggers. Then, onto the right side of the screen is that you can see the types of points and skills that those characters are starting out with, which can easily show which weapons and fighting styles they'll be the most proficient in and is the best to progress throughout this game. Next up are the 2 clergy warriors of the Order of the Holy Cross, located on the northernmost part of the map. Now, starting first, we have Carl the Bishop, and on the other side, we also have Elizabeth the Priest.
Huh?
I think it should be Priestess because she's a woman, but nonetheless though, the game itself will state that the Order produces the best maces and armor in the world, along with the Order's warriors depend on their armor and constitution, so some of them are just walking castles. Now, I could attest to that my first playthrough, starting with Carl himself, is that indeed increasing that constitution stat, which you can see on the top side, will then just simply increase the health that your character can have and scales with their level. So, although you might start with a small amount of like 220 health, which is still pretty big for a level 1 character, if you progress through the game enough, you can end up close to nearly 1,000 health towards the end, making you tank just about any hit that will come across your way. From my estimate, the Order of the Holy Cross has taken inspiration from the historical Teutonic Order, which was a medieval state formed around 1200, and examples such as the great city of Bromberg in the game, which I would say has taken inspiration from the historical Bronsberg, would actually get to show you and where these guys even came from. Moving forward, we have the people of the Forest Lands, shown by representatives of the players like Zveslav, and on the other side, Olga. And so we can make the inference that the Forest Land people were taking inspiration from the medieval Kievan Rus, who lived out in the eastern parts of Europe during this time within the large swaths of forest in small settlements. But nonetheless, though, the game specifically points out that the forest lands produce the best axes and bows in the world. And so with that, the classic trope of the large Eastern European man with big axe can be played over here. Either when you charge right to your enemy and chop their heads off with that very heavy axe, or you can stay back from afar and sharpshoot them with a bow. Then of course, what good is a game focused on the past be without the use of the curved katanas or the highly trained and sophisticated ninjas of a fictional Japan, which you can play as either Zieg or Niora of the Far East Empire. I mean, it's kind of on the nose when they name their cities like Fukushima and Nagoya, but in any case though, is that the game will specifically note that the Empire produces only its national weapons. You will not find any swords, axes, maces, or spears in their cities. Although you can argue in the technicalities that Niora in her profile is using a pole arm, which could be a spear depending on your perspective on that, but you still get the idea as to what you're going to use and what you can find when you start off on this section of the map. But that's enough of that. It's time for you to select one of those 8 playable characters and begin the game. And so Feudalism 1 starts your adventure with the nice humble beginning of you being a leader of a small town and having only a few warriors at your side as an army. So for you to begin and progress your character, you will most likely have to go to the city hall and ask for a quest, in which the governor will tell you either in 2 categories of doing a courier service or a bounty hunting job. First off, the courier service should be pretty self-explanatory in that you just need to go off to a city in which they need to deliver a package, and by heading out and going to that designated city, you just interact with their city hall and they'll get you paid out. But of course, when you send yourself out into the open road, obviously set in the Middle Ages, there is going to be some danger in that there is a chance for you being jumped by some bandits. And so combat in this game is going to be pretty easy, and the game will remind you anytime that you actually begin combat for the first time, even though you load a save to play the same character some more, it doesn't matter. But nonetheless though, you'll be controlling your character with the WASD keys, and your main attack will be with the space bar, in which if you're using melee, will whack the opponent when you run up to them, or if you're using range, you can stay back and line up a shot to deal with them. But of course, if you aren't keeping track of your health when your opponents are attacking you, you very well could. Fighting in this game was pretty easy to follow, and so you can see yourself either using your primary or secondary weapon based on what your character is holding, and you can, based on the situation, switch from one weapon to the other. But of course, when you are low in health, you can use one of the potions that are in your inventory to restore that health, or in certain cases, use a scroll seen on the bottom right side in order for you to restore yours and all your allies' health. We'll get to those in detail a little bit later. But with the fight over, and you coming out on top, you can see yourself gaining XP and all the loot that is picked up off the floor after demolishing your enemies. Going back to the second type of job, which is going to be the bounty hunting job, once you accept that quest, you know that it's going to be active when you set out onto the map and you see the mountainous rogue hideout in which they are hiding. And so, one way to confirm that you are going to fight the right army for that money in which you were promised is that when you accept the battle and it is taking place in a cave scenario representing that rogue's hideout, you know that you will be paid out once you return back home and go to the governor another time. But with that, at the end of most fights, you will be gaining XP enough so that you can level up. And so once you go to the inventory tab inside of a town, you can see all the different skills in which you can level up to increase the power and capabilities of your character. Going first off the top, you can see that we have the strength, dexterity, constitution, and intelligence skills, in which the game will say that will cost 2 points each of your free points if you're looking to increase the level on that. And then everything below will be all the weapon skills, in which individually they will allow you to deal more damage if you're using that weapon type. So, starting from the top is that strength obviously increases the damage output of your weapons. Then we have dexterity, which increases the chance for you to dodge attacks and keep you alive on the battlefield. Then we have constitution, which simply increases the health and your ability to survive on the battlefield. Now, for those first three traits, those are usually used as requirements for you to equip better gear of either weapons or armor. But going to the fourth skill, intelligence, the game specifically says that intelligence is the most important attribute for any commander. It is required to master skills patriotism and art of war. Also, every 2 points of intelligence increases your unit's HP and damage by 1%. Now that's quite interesting that there are skills specifically used to just buff your army and the allies in which you have hired. But with that, you actually start the game with a free 25 points in which you can spend right at level 1. And so you can either spend 2 at a time for those first 4 traits, or it will cost you 1 point each for any of the individual weapon skills down at the bottom of the skill table. With that, you can see at the very end of it, we have the Art of War and Patriotism, in which the game explains first with Art of War that it increases HP and damage of all your units by 0.5% per skill point. And then with the Patriotism, it's going to say it increases HP and damage of your units which are the same nation as you by 1% per skill point. Now, it should be quite obvious that if you go ahead and start maxing out on those skills of intelligence, art of war, and patriotism, if you get everything just right, you can send out waves of your crusading knights, and they will go out forth on their big horses and start slapping your opponent for about 400 damage each, while on the other end, you yourself is going to only deal about like 100 or so each, and so all you need to do is just sit back and watch your maxed out army start destroying every single city that it comes across. Once you have leveled up enough and collected all the loot and money from the jobs in which you have taken, you might think to yourself, hey, I like the level of my character and the army that I'm leading. Maybe we can take over the next town over. And although the option to take over the city is available to the town that is already in your control, if you try to take that over, they're going to be like, Walter, this town is already ours. We can't kill our own people for nothing, Walter. Even though glorious combat is a reward of its own, the main reason as to why you want to conquer other small towns over is that you could unlock the barracks to that area. Now, when you try to hire soldiers in other cities in which you don't have control over, they're going to be like, Walter, you don't rule our city. We don't want to sell our troops to strangers, Walter. Which I guess mercenaries aren't a thing in this universe. But in any case, once you agree to fight to take over that city, prepare for a fight to the death. But once you go and destroy all the enemies, including the ones they have in reserves, that will be about it for a small city, and you have taken over it and added it to your name. But on the other hand, if you're trying to take over a larger city, there's going to be 2 phases of battle, in which the first one is similar to the previous, But then we go to the second one, which takes place in the city hall, or the castle hall, I guess, if you think of it that way. But in any case, though, this is where the elite troops will be awaiting you, and if you aren't prepared, could easily lead you to your death. But if your character is leveled enough and you have the right army beside you, well, congratulations! You have taken over a large city, and you can enjoy all the different troops that are available to hire and add into your army. Now, it becomes apparent after you capture your first few cities that the amount of XP gained doesn't match as to what you first started out with, being a courier or bounty hunter, and so you'll cast those old jobs aside and embrace your new role as the conqueror of the entire known world. So with that, as you add more and more professional soldiers into your army, it seems like the bandits just keep right on coming and wanting to take you for your money, although they don't get the message that even after you completely slaughter all of them, they just keep coming and trying to ignore you. Well, it wouldn't matter if they just want to give you free XP and gear, I suppose. But you have a more important job as you continue to progress, as you need to start looking into the gear to absolutely maximize the amount of damage that you can do. So not only do better pieces of gear and equipment become available as you level up and meet certain requirements, but also there's a chance that after going through a battle, that one of the enemies had a piece of enchanted equipment on them in which you can observe to see if you would like to wear instead. So going to your inventory after a nice long battle, you can take a look, and these weapons are usually going to be in this blue border, which lets you know that you have an enchanted item. And when you hover over that, it will tell you exactly what the effect does in full text. And so let's take an example of a blind axe, in which it's going to say that it increases damage by 60 to 160, critical strike chance by 40%, and defense by 80%, but decreases hit chance by 30% and dodge chance by 60%. Oh boy, do the pros outweigh the cons entirely, and you slap that thing right into your inventory. But always remember that these types of weapons and pieces of armor can only be obtained by actual loot from the battlefield. So I guess that just means we have to keep right on conquering. Something to note as you expand your realm is that if you manage to capture the towns and cities of the same country that you started in, no one cares. But the moment that you take over a town or village of any other existing realm that is outside of the country that you started in, all other areas that are applicable will turn red and become hostile to you, in that the moment that you step foot into any of those areas, you will get, "What the? The enemy himself has come at our gates? We'll punish you for all our captured cities. To arms, my men, to arms!" It makes sense that they will see the capture of their cities as an act of war from an outsider, but something that I'd like to note is that even if you manage to take over all of their biggest cities, their capital, and all the way down to the last small village, you will get the same exact response, and the people there are going to act just as hostile and will fight fearlessly down to the last man, no matter the odds. I mean, yeah, it's cool that these guys show no fear, but I mean, historically, the greatest of conquerors took over plenty of different kingdoms and cities without even a fight, using fear and intimidation instead. Nonetheless, once you manage to move through the entirety of the mainland of the map, conquering every single city, you can also go onto a ship, which will cost you about 4,000 GP every time you sail to reach the other islands on this world. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you're by yourself, it will cost you 4,000 GP, and if you have a full-sized army of all horsemen, it still will cost you 4,000 GP. In any case, once you conquer every last city and they all swear allegiance directly to you, nothing happens. There is no victory screen. Well, in any case though, we have a last couple of things we want to go over in Feudalism 1 before we move on to the second game. And so the first thing is going to be dealing with the stables, in which some cities allow you to purchase a horse, in which you can then attack your enemies while on the back of your magnificent steed. Something to note is that not all weapons are allowed to be used on horseback, and you have to make sure that your weapon of choice is still usable in that sense. But one of the best memories that I have is that once you unlock the Crusader, which is more or less the tank on a horse, is that you can completely fill your army with them and watch as they charge on their magnificent black horses and clad in all black armor and just trample and completely slaughter the enemy as you watch them take them all out without a single bit of casualty on their side. Nonetheless, though, we can move on to the temple, in which you can purchase things like potions and scrolls, as we've discussed before, in that potions will allow you to heal yourself while you are in battle, but then the scrolls actually allow you to heal your entire army as well as yourself, with their most expensive scroll allowing you to heal 2/3 of the maximum health of everyone, including yourself, which actually makes yourself unkillable along with every single one of your soldiers if you have enough money and you just sit back and keep pressing the 5 key, in which it is normally bound to just keep everyone alive and instantly win all your battles. But lastly, there is the Scroll of Bloody Rage. Ooh, that's edgy. And that scroll is more or less the one in which the game says that they will increase their attack speed based on how much missing health that they have, allowing it to get a huge bonus. Okay, well, forgetting that typo, you basically get the idea. The more missing health they have, the faster they attack, allowing you to turn the tide of a battle depending how much damage your guys have taken. But in any case, that is the groundwork of Feudalism 1, in which you get to go ahead and conquer the entire known world one city at a time. And now we can get into Feudalism 2, in which right from the intro, we can see how VitalyZ has poured even more into the already complete game of Feudalism 1. Duels, battles, power,
お前はもう死んでいる。何？
leadership, tactics, slaughter, betrayal, all packaged in the new Feudalism 2. Now I get it, we're all very excited to see what this game has to offer, but first, let's go back to that character selection screen, and would you look at that? Although we have the first 8 that we are accustomed to in the first game, we have some new members that we can choose from, starting with, looks like we have members of the Black Horde, with the first member being Chinggis. I mean, again, that's kind of on the nose of who they're trying to model that after, but we also have Inga in the sense where, obviously, as you can guess, their horsemanship and their bows are going to easily overrun their opponents. Then we have the members of the South Desert, in which they get to use their super secret special weapons, the Qatar, in which they get to deal a lot of damage with on that weapon. But with that, you get to see that from the map where they have city names like Medina, Aden, and Samara, which, yes, you can kind of tell which inspiration those guys have been taken from as well. Now, on the rightmost side, we can actually choose and make our own character. Whoa, that's a lot of stuff. Well, we can plainly see that VitalyZ wanted us to take apart and a deeper look inside of the different new things that he has added into this game, such as passives and auras, but we'll get to those in more detail later on. For now, let's just create a new character from one of the pre-made ones and get right into this game. So once more, we are greeted with the familiar sight of us being inside of the small town of a larger country. But with that, the layout is fairly similar, with some of the things being improved upon, in the sense that the city hall and barracks are exactly the way that they were before, but then the marketplace serves the same function as the forge in the first game, where you would buy and sell equipment, but then the new forge inside of Feudalism 2 serves a different purpose, which we will get to later. Then the temple, which, ooh, yeah, that's kind of nerfed pretty hard with them only being able to sell 2 potions, and that's literally it. But in any case, though, we can get to the barn, which, just like the first time, we can get right on top of a horse and begin fighting that way. Of course, the beginning part of the game is going to play exactly like we did in Feudalism 1, in which you'll be looking into the city hall to look for some quests to get started, in which the same two job types will be offered of a courier service or the bounty hunting jobs. But alongside that, there's also an option in a city hall, at least if it's a city that you have control over, for you to fight the town champion. You can choose to do this either in the 1v1 or the army versus army scenario, and then you will go ahead and start fighting. Something to note is that the town champion is actually a really big opponent, and so you just might lose if you're not prepared for it. Now, in the 1v1 scenario, you don't gain anything if you win, but in the army versus army scenario, you will gain XP, and although it seems kind of odd, the town never seems to run out of champions and you can just keep fighting them over and over again. Now, thankfully, the best quality of life update to feudalism comes in the form of the sell all button, in that in the marketplace, no matter how much loot you have, you can click that button and all the loot will be sold immediately. Now, there were some painful memories back in Feudalism 1, in that I had to go and sell one item at a time just to get my coins together to go buy my gear. Not anymore, as that button completely solves the whole monotony of trying to sell everything, and then you'll be left with just the runes, in which we get to now talk about the new forge in this game. Now, there are two different ways to actually increase the quality and damage output of your weapons. Now, to note, this only applies to weapons. Armor and shield, sadly, do not get any sort of upgrades in this game. But in any case, though, it looks like the enchanting step, which you can use any of the runes that you've picked up along the way, can be put directly onto the weapon. And in my opinion, the best effects for this would be the occult rune, which does more damage the more armor your enemy has, and also the bloody rune, which simply just ignores all armor when calculating damage. And with that, any other weapon could also go up these steps in refining, in which you have a percent chance to increase the damage output of the weapon. It can go all the way up to level 10. Unfortunately though, as you go up the levels, the chance of success decreases, and if you fail at any step, the entire weapon is just destroyed. Now, this is exactly where I learned how to save scum in a role-playing game, in that you can save the game before attempting a level of refining, and then reloading back to the save if you manage to fail, putting everything back and giving you another chance at it. So now it is time to talk about the main update to the game's combat skills and mechanics, in that I personally like to split up all the different weapons into the categories of either whether you're melee, you have splash abilities, or single target ones, and then we have the range skills based off the different range weapon that you are currently using. So first off, there are a number of weapons that fall under the splash ability category, in that we have hammers, axes, two-handed swords, staves, and daggers, in which all of these will find some way or other with an ability to be able to deal a lot of damage to enemies around you. Then on top of that, we can go to the single target weapons, in which it should be pretty self-explanatory, with things like swords and shields being able to block damage incoming while still managing to deal damage back to a single target. Then dual swords, with being a super agile weapon of choice, you will start flying around and be dodging a lot of attacks while managing to deal plenty of your own. But then we can get to the katana, which is very specialized as you might think, with some rudimentary attacks to begin with, but then the mastery of the third and final skill, the guillotine blade, will allow you to do an insane amount of damage all in one blow, but then use up all of your mana in the process. But going down to the ranged weapons, although the bow and crossbow should be pretty easy as well, with the bow raining down shots onto your opponents and the crossbow lining up a perfect penetrating shot across multiple enemies, is that the throwing skill is the most interesting, in that in my eyes, with the special throwing weapon of the Great Trade Republic, is that they can offer the Greek fire throwing weapon, which comes in a bottle form, which is a little bit different than the Greek fire that we know and reference to back in the olden days of using napalm on other ships in the ocean. But nonetheless though, you can use the Greek fire and the throwing skill together to start throwing 3 at a time right at your enemies, and you will get something like... One last note is that the South Desert's secret weapon, the Katars, which are based off of push daggers, well, if you master all the skills down on that weapon tree, is that you get to unlock the Meteor Strike, which gets to deal a lot of damage to everyone around the character in a 3x3 square, in which, at least for me, I played the South Desert the most just because of that one ability, allowing me to make a build of like a one-man army, and that it was just me versus every single army coming right at me. And if everyone is placed properly, I can go ahead and destroy all 8 enemies around me in one attack. Next up are going to be the passive skills, in that it should be pretty straightforward in terms of what they're going to do if you level them up. Mostly, they buff things like the type of army soldiers that you have, such as actual foot soldiers, or those that are on horseback, or whether or not they're using melee or ranged, and so on like that. So with each of them, the more you level them up, the better your army is going to be, just passively as you go on to the next battle. Then there are the aura skills, in which the player can start spending some SP per second or mana, and they start receiving certain buffs or do certain things throughout the battle. The most common ones will be things like heal and barrier, which they will either give some health to an ally or put a barrier on another one. But then there are also some faction-specific auras, in that the game would actually note whether or not the people in the army that you are hiring is actually part of the same faction as you or not, and then start healing those same faction members or actually dealing damage to them, which is quite interesting. Then going to the more disruptive and the more game-changing auras is what I would say is we start off with the first 2 here with the Banshee Cry and then the Sacrifice auras. First, with the Banshee Cry is that the player will start to use up a percent of their health at every second. Then, with that taken away, they actually start dealing damage against all enemies. Inversely, with the Sacrifice aura, is that the player will also start getting rid of percentages of their health, but then they also will have their allies all be healed for a certain amount. Now, the main issue that the game specifically notes is that you can actually die from keeping these auras on for too long. Then moving to the leeching abilities of Life Leech and Soul Drain, this time you actually take away the health of your allies, and with the Life Leech you gain some health back, or in the Soul Drain you start regaining your lost SP or mana back. Now, in this case, you won't kill your allies if you leave these abilities on, but the game does note that they can go down to 1 HP, and then your entire army's dead without you even noticing if you're not careful with it. Lastly, we have the most disruptive of the aura skills in my book, in which these 4 listed out here are going to be the Venom Cloud, Balance of Force, then on the other side we have the Holy Tribunal and Unholy Breath. Starting with the first 2, the Venom Cloud begins with you being able to turn on that aura, and then randomly different enemies will have a chance to become poisoned, in that they start losing health over time down to 1 HP. Similarly, the Balance of Power can turn the tide of a battle, because that ability will turn on, and then you start draining your the health of your opponents, and then start healing your allies for a certain amount. Notably, the game will say that both of these will not be able to kill any opponents outright, but reduce them down to 1 HP, so they're very easy to take care of. Then on the other side, we have the Holy Tribunal, in where when the aura turns on, it will begin randomly smiting an enemy for critical amounts of damage, which can kill them if done enough. Lastly though, we have Unholy Breath, which I would say can really change the tone of a battle, in that for every enemy it will randomly roll a negative effect, in that the enemy can be poisoned, can be stunned, or be given madness for a few seconds. Now madness in this case is going to be where they actually turn against their allies, and so you have another enemy tying up other enemies in a one-on-one combat situation. Lastly, the game notes that there is simply a 3% chance for any enemy being rolling for the Unholy Breath for them to simply just die. What fun! It turns out that not only the players can use abilities, but also certain hired soldiers, when they are advanced enough, can also have abilities, most notably attached to the weapons that they are using. So, in certain scenarios, when you finally take over the capital of the South Desert, you can hire a whole army of professional assassins to start raining down meteors and taking out full stacks of enemies. While on the other hand, if you go and take over the capital of the Holy Order up in the north, you'll be able to get a full line of tank busters equipped with hammers bashing their way through the front lines of your enemies. Amazing. Now, what about Feudalism 3? Well, unfortunately, VitalyZ had a different idea as to where the direction of this franchise will go, in the sense that the game first starts off showing you all the different things that they have added, in the sense that they give you guns as a new ranged weapon to use, you get to have magic as a completely separate method of attack style to use, and then there simply is a lack of cavalry at all, and no one is on horseback anymore in this game. So although the scale of battle has been increased, and some might say that the skill trees and the different abilities are a little bit more innovative and add a lot more action to the combat style, I would personally say that it is a little bit of a letdown and a bit of a deviation away from the first two games for you to really get out there and start conquering and taking one city after the other. And so for me, Feudalism 1 and 2 brought a lot of core memories in which I was aspiring to conquer the entire known world across all the different countries and cultures that the game had to offer. And this was a good alternative to me not being able to have the money to buy games from other franchises like Total War and Age of Empires. But nonetheless, though, this game was something that I was able to spend a short amount of time in, looking to build the best adventure and conquer and go into battles against all the different armies that the game had to offer. And so with that, I hope this game shed some light into a little piece of history as to what I was playing back then, and maybe you can see as to why I find this game quite important to think of one's progression from being completely landless into the conqueror of the entire known world. And so I'll be streaming parts of Feudalism 2 on my Twitch livestream from Tuesdays and Thursdays, and hopefully I can see some of you there while I go out and try to see how quickly I can turn the entire world against me. So with that, as always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.